Hello, my name is Tim Bolduc, and I am a city manager in the city of Crestview, Florida, up in the Panhandle. I came into local government through the building code and inspections department after serving as a general contractor in the private sector for multiple years. Today, my goal is to help you understand a little bit about building code and inspections, how they came into the industry in Florida, when it became important, and then some different options on how you can actually provide this service at your agency. We're going to talk about small agencies and large agencies and what's the best way for you to provide this service. And then at the end, I'm going to work to try to help you understand what I think a city manager should know and what your role is as it relates to the enforcement of the building code. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit of history about building code and inspections in the state of Florida. So back in 1974, the legislature for the state of Florida decided that it was important that building codes become a priority inside the state. Now, when they did that, they wanted to protect the ability for home rule, meaning that each individual jurisdiction had some say in the type of codes that they would enforce. Most jurisdictions enforced what was called the SBCCI, which is the Southern Standards for Building Code and Inspections. And it was every year a new edition would come out, and from 1974 on, most jurisdictions used it. The issue with it was that there was not a specific requirement for every jurisdiction to use the exact same set of codes. And so some would use a current year, but those that were smaller and couldn't afford to replace their code books every year might be using something that was 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. It just depended on what their budget was and what the abilities of their inspectors inside their departments were. So we progressed this way all the way from 1974 for about 20 years. And then in 1992, an event occurred in the state of Florida that absolutely changed the way we saw the importance of ensuring that all buildings were constructed to a standard that was going to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. So in 1992, when Hurricane Andrew came through, there was devastation throughout the state of Florida, specifically in South Florida. We saw about a 250,000 people were homeless following the storm. There were 25 dead and over $27 billion worth of damages. This is the highest number in damages for any particular storm except for Katrina. And if you were to correct for inflation, it probably still would be the highest costing storm in documented history. So following this, after 20 years of keeping the system exactly the way that it was, the legislature decided that it was time to make some changes. And Governor Childs decided that he was going to be the governor that would protect the state of Florida and its residents from damage created from hurricanes. What you're looking at now is a timeline that provides the actual history of the adoption of the Florida Building Code. As I mentioned earlier, for 20 years, the state of Florida didn't change its standard at all. But following Hurricane Andrew, it became an important issue, both for the legislature and for the government and for the governor. And so in 1994, the governor and the legislature implemented a requirement for building departments to have a licensed professional running them. And what that would do is that would ensure that every jurisdiction would have somebody on staff that was capable of ensuring that the homes that were being built or the commercial buildings that were being built would be to a standard that would protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. By 1996, the governor implemented a process called the Florida Building Code Study Commission. And the intent of the commission was to evaluate all of the potential code options that were available and determine which one would become the state of Florida's permanent unified building code. The goal of the legislature was to ensure that every jurisdiction, whether a contractor was working inside the county or in a city or a neighboring city, that every jurisdiction would be enforcing the same building code and that building code would protect the citizens in the state of Florida. So by 1998, they had developed a process to adopt the International Building Code modified to match Florida standards for hurricane wind, and it would be called the Florida Building Code. The plan to adopt it would be a 3-year plan, and by 2001, the final version of the building code would be adopted. In March of 2002, every jurisdiction within the state of Florida was required to implement this building code. From 2002 forward, every 2 years we get an update to the building code. The most recent version of that was in 2023. So that gives us a little bit of a history about how we got to where we are today. I'm hopeful that this will help you to understand the importance of ensuring that the building code is provided or is accommodated within your community. Now that you've got a little bit of history on how we got to where we are today, let's talk about what the building code actually is. So the Florida Building Code is the standard system for all the requirements for a building permit for every type of construction that occurs within the state of Florida. It doesn't matter whether it's commercial, residential, remodeling, or new construction. Every building requires a building permit. And when it gets a building permit, the work has to be performed in accordance with the building code. The document itself is actually made up of multiple books. There is a commercial building code, there is a residential building code, there is a plumbing, mechanical, an electrical building code, and then there's even a handicap accessibility section. The Florida Accessible Code is actually the most stringent accessible code in the country. We actually pride ourselves on the ability to ensure that people with disabilities are able to access all of the facilities, and we do that by ensuring that every building meets the Florida Building Code accessibility requirements. And so it's a standardized system to ensure that that happens. The intent was to make sure that every engineer, every architect, every contractor, every building official, and every building inspector would have the exact same set of documents when they were preparing to either pull a permit, inspect a project, or construct a project. Over the last 20 years, we have watched this system evolve into a very effective way for contractors to be able to move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, inspectors to move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and for engineers and architects to all speak the same language. That was the intent of the adoption of a uniform building code, and it's actually been very successful. As a city manager, you're going to have a couple of opportunities to decide how you're going to actually implement the building code. With all the cities that we have in the state of Florida, there's different sizes, different scopes, different budgets. Some of us run full service cities, which have all of the different services from garbage to roads and streets to building permits to code enforcement to planning, all of that stuff. Some of us actually farm out or hire private companies to manage those kind of things for us. And then there's some of us that are in between. What I want to talk about right now is when you're looking at a building, enforcing the building code, what are some of the ways that you can do it? And it basically breaks into 3 different models. And actually 4 different models, and you'll see those on the screen right now. So the first option that you have is what we refer to as a full service. A full service building department at a municipality will have a building official, plans examiners, which will look at the plans when they're submitted for applications. You will have permit technicians, which will issue the building permits once the applications are complete and the plans have been reviewed. And you'll have building inspectors that will go out and inspect the projects throughout the process to ensure that they're in compliance. And then you'll have, most jurisdictions will also have a fire marshal that will inspect on commercial projects as well. This is what we refer to as a full service. Obviously, this is in order for a municipality or an agency to have a full service department, they're going to have to be big enough with enough inspections and enough permits to offset it. A little bit later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about how the financing works and how you would actually fund a building department. And so we'll save that part for a little bit later on. The second option is to do what's called a hybrid version. Hybrid versions allow you to leverage the ability to have full operational control of the building department within your municipality while also ramping up or ramping down based on demand. And we do that through what's called a contract with what's called a private provider. So there are options for you to engage with companies that will provide these types of inspections. They have employees that hold the same licensing that's required for if you hired an inspector or a plans examiner or a building official, but they will allow you to do it on an as-needed basis. So the second option for you is what we refer to as a hybrid option. The third option would be for you to just fully contract it out to a private provider. And that would mean that you don't have a building official, you don't have any inspectors, you don't have any permit technicians, anything like that. The statute allows you as a municipality to engage a contractor or a private contractor or a private provider to provide those services for you. There are some benefits to it, and we're going to talk about in just a minute the pros and the cons of each of these. So we'll cover that when we get a little bit later on. And the last version is there's a very specific section of the statute that allows municipalities to contract with or to allow the county to provide that service for them as well, or another city. And so it is a multiple jurisdiction. It's called an interlocal agreement. And so what it does is it provides, that section of the statute provides you the opportunity to go to a neighboring jurisdiction, enter into an agreement with them, and allow them to perform any level of the process for you that you'd like. If you wanted to issue your own permits but have them do the inspections, the statute allows you to do that. If you wanted them to go next door to your neighboring jurisdiction and get their permit there, the statute allows you to do that. And so, as I said, these are the four primary options for you as a city manager when you're looking at whether or not you want to be able to provide this service or how you're going to provide this service, as it is required by statute. So let's talk about the pros and the cons of the first one. The full service option, obviously, from a pro's perspective, is that it allows you as the manager to have some insight into what's happening each and every day. It will allow you to control things like customer service. It will allow you to set the timelines that are necessary for the issuance of a building permit, whether that is to extend them or to shorten them, depending on whether or not you have the resources that are necessary, or if you wanted to be a little bit faster than your surrounding jurisdictions and then be able to use this as an economic development tool, you could do that as well. And so having a full service department has a lot of pros associated with it. You get a good idea of what's going on. You can see the challenges that your department's facing, and you can kind of stay pace with what's going on. So now that we understand the positive side, let's go back and take a look at what the negatives could be or potential drawbacks for a full service option could be. The first thing I would say is that it's expensive. If you don't have adequate number of permits to offset the expense that's associated with it, then it's a difficult operation to maintain. The second thing would be being able to staff it properly, because the statute requires licensed professionals to hold each of the different positions, being inspectors, plans examiners, electrical inspectors, plumbing inspectors, mechanical inspectors. Each different inspection requires a different licensed professional. Sometimes it gets difficult for jurisdictions to be able to afford to staff that type of an operation. The next option is a hybrid option. And so let's talk first about the pros for the hybrid option. Again, like a full service option, being able to provide the building permit process yourself inside your municipality is a pro for the reasons I mentioned earlier. In the hybrid, even if they don't work directly for you and you have a private provider, maybe you have a building official that you have on staff, but all of the rest of the trades are handled by private providers, you as the manager or the agency will have operational control over that contract. So you're going to be able to help them in understanding how important it is to move at the rate of speed that you think that your city wants to provide it at. And so with a hybrid, you find pluses in the ability to stay in the business of providing building permits, but also you can do it at a pace at which you can actually afford to do it. Using private providers for the inspection side or the plan review side means that you only have to tap them when you actually have permits in. And so that's one of the pluses of it. One of the negative sides of it is you don't fully control whatever agency that you're using. So if you're in your hybrid, if you're using a private provider, or maybe in your hybrid you're using a different municipality, as we talked about as one of the options, you don't have full control over how fast they're going to move. So that's one of the things that you're going to want to pay attention to, and that could potentially be a drawback to having a hybrid. The next option is a private contractor or a private provider. One of the pros of that is you can do that on a cost basis or a as-used basis, meaning that you only have to engage them for a service whenever whenever somebody is trying to pull a permit. So someone will come in, pull a permit, they'll make application to the private contractor. The private contractor will then take those fees, issue the service, and depending on how your contract is, either remit some of that money to you for oversight, or the fees will stay directly with that private contractor. The benefit to that is you're not responsible for staffing or holding or keeping each of the individual professionals licensed or making sure that you keep your positions filled. The drawback to that is very similar to the one in the hybrid, where sometimes you will not be able to control the speed at which things occur. Another problem that you might face with a private contractor is your ability to control the cost. If if you're trying to stimulate economic growth by making the entry to business inside of your municipality low in order to invite people to come into your jurisdiction, the cost of a private provider may be greater than it is for a full service agency. And so that's one of the drawbacks as well. The last one is the county or city partnership. If you provide, or if you give all of the services over to the county and allow them to do it, that the easy part about that, or the plus of that, is it's not something you have to worry about. Your elected officials, when someone comes in and wants to know why a building permit is taking so long, you can just refer them to the county. That's an option. The drawbacks to that is the revenue that is collected by building permits would then not be going to your municipality, it would be going to the county. Another drawback would be where there's a plus that you can send them to the county to ask if their application is not being processed at the speed that they wish. The drawback to that is you also don't have operational control over it. And so if your mindset inside your city is to work together to provide solutions to be what we like to refer to as business friendly or efficient, then you might find that your surrounding jurisdiction may not have the same level of importance. The other thing I would say about that is because for a neighboring jurisdiction, whether it be the city or a county agency, their priority is not going to be the same as a private provider. In other words, you may not take priority when they have inspections that come in inside your jurisdiction. When you have an inspection come in for your jurisdiction, it's not going to take priority over one in their jurisdiction. So these are the 4 different options that you have available to you as a manager. Again, each of them have their pros and cons. And the thing about being a city manager is that your job is to assess the situation, assess your resources, and then determine which one will be your best option. There are a couple of things that don't require building permits. One of those would be railroad facilities. So if you have a railroad inside your jurisdiction, anything that occurs inside the railroad does not require a building permit. A second thing, which some of us have in Florida with all of our rural areas, is non-residential farm buildings. So if you're a rural community and you've got farms inside your community, you're going to find that non-residential farm buildings are also not required to have building permits. Let's talk about the fees and the funding. One of your primary responsibilities as a city manager is to ensure the fiscal responsibility of your agency. One of the things that you have to do in doing that is to determine whether or not a particular service is something that you can actually afford to provide. The building department is unique in that the statute actually spells out some very specific requirements about how you can and when you should charge fees related to Florida Building Code enforcement. Back in 2001, when the first building code was adopted or was enacted, the legislature allowed for building departments, municipalities, and counties to charge a fee specifically for the implementation of the building code and the enforcement thereof. That fee is intended to be a user fee. And so most jurisdictions will set aside in the form of a special fund a way to track the money that comes in as it relates to building inspections. Counties are required to actually establish an enterprise fund where municipalities are not, meaning that at the county level, the building department must offset its own expenses. At the city level or at the municipality level, you can actually subsidize it if you choose to with your general fund. It's not a good idea, but it is something that you can do. Most jurisdictions, what we do is establish a special fund. What that means is that it's actually a separate fund that's set up specifically to handle the income and the expenses related to the enforcement of the building code. Every expense that I have in the building code is kept separate in a special fund so that I can ensure that I am charging adequately for that process. Every jurisdiction does it a little bit different. The International Building Code actually provides a mechanism that will help you to establish your fees. It is a way that you can do it based on the square footage for any type of a building. But what we found is that if you look at each permit type, the number of inspections that you typically have to do, and then you can take that and develop from that a cost per inspection, then you are able to calculate your fees based on that. And so that's what we do. And we do that through a special fund. That way I can ensure, or we can ensure, that whatever we are spending to enforce the Florida Building Code is offset by the revenue that comes in. There's a couple of other ways that you can do it. There is a designated expense process. Again, that's what they do within the county. It is a enterprise fund, which means that it must offset its own expenses. The other thing that we want to keep in mind is building inspections collect fees at the front end of a permit process. So when you go to issue a building permit, your contractor will come in, they will make application to you for a building permit. As you get that money in, once the project begins, you have to go and perform those inspections. One of the things that you'll need to keep in mind is you may collect money for building inspections in one calendar year, but not be able to provide those services to a later calendar year. And so it's important as the city manager, that you ensure that the budget stays solvent throughout those multiple years of any given project. A lot of times you'll see a large commercial come in, it'll be in one calendar year, and it may be 2 calendar years before you actually complete it. Why is that important? Building permits are often driven by the ebb and flows of the economy. And so you may have a year where you issue a lot of building permits, and then they may slow down in the next year. When you're establishing your budget, it's important that you understand what obligation you have to provide that service for permits that have already been paid. And so in order to do that, you establish, obviously within your fund, a reserve. The statute actually dictates the maximum amount of reserve that a building department can have. And so when you're establishing your budget, it's important that you understand exactly what that looks like. So now that we understand kind of how we got here, and then we understand what the finances look like for a building department, the question that you may be asking yourself is, why would I want to take on this hassle? As a manager, if I can just allow somebody else to do this, why would I not do that? Well, this is what I'll tell you about that. As a city manager, your responsibility is to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of your community. But it also is to help to control the ability to provide good quality service and to give the best possible experience that you can give to the people who are trying to either do business or live within your community. Building permits and inspections are a big part of that. Whenever there's a new business that comes to town, there's always some form of construction that's related to that. So our job as managers from an economic development side is to reduce the time between the idea of a new business and the actual first time that they sell a product. A lot of times that's controlled by how long the building permit process takes. Because there's a requirement for plans, because there's a requirement for plan review, because there's a requirement for inspections, all of these things could add additional time from idea to sale. And so as the manager, it's good for you to have the ability to have some say in what's done as far as timelines are concerned when it comes to the review and the issuance of building permits, and then how those inspections are performed. I will also tell you this, the statute or the Florida legislature is very interested in how long it takes from the time that somebody has an idea until a building permit gets issued. We as city managers want to ensure our ability to continue to manage our own jurisdictions, and this is a way to do that. And so why should you have a building department inside your municipality? The primary reason that I think, two of them, the two primary reasons that I believe you should have a building department inside your jurisdiction is, one, we have the responsibility to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our public. If we have operational control over the people that are doing it, then we have the ability to ensure that we get the best possible product there. The second one is, I believe that it's an economic development tool. So let me give you one example why I think it's an economic development tool. During the COVID pandemic, we saw across the country where not only businesses closed down, but also local governments were closed. During this time period, many of the developers that had projects in the works had to put their projects on hold. In the city of Crestview, where I'm from, we actually had a development that had just begun the review process. It was going to be a shopping center. It was going to have an anchor tenant that was a much coveted anchor tenant inside of my community. It was also on a piece of property that we had been trying to get developed out as a shopping center for quite some time, actually long before I even got there. And so everybody was excited. We had already announced that they were coming. But the COVID hit and the slow down the spread implementation came, which required most places to shut down. During this time period, I was able to reach out to that developer and let them know that we would comply with all of the COVID requirements, which we did. But as soon as we were able, that we would be outperforming inspections. This particular developer was not from our area. They were actually from New York. And in their state and throughout the rest of the states, they were having trouble getting the rest of their developments done. And so because we had the operational control over when inspections would be done, how we would handle our plan review, we were able to give them the level of confidence that was necessary for them to continue to push forward with that project. At the end of the day, a project that was going to have one grade acre tenant that we all were really excited about actually ended up having 5 junior anchor tenants that everybody in the city absolutely loves. And the reason we were able to do that is because while other places were unable to ensure that they would keep the project moving forward, we were. And we did that because we had control over how our building department operated, how fast we would review the plans, and whether or not we would be able to go out and do inspections. One of the other things that having a building department does is it helps you to improve the relationships inside your community. And I would recommend to you as the city manager to have an understanding about what your requirements are within that department, but then also to connect the people within your department with some of the important industries in your area. For example, the Chamber of Commerce. We have a great relationship between our building department and the Chamber of Commerce. Each month we have a meeting where we talk about what's going on inside the city, what's going on inside the building department, and it gives them an opportunity to help us become aware of any problems that potential development thinks that they're having, so that we can take the steps necessary to help them through the process. It also allows you the opportunity to provide additional resources for your surrounding jurisdictions if you needed to do that as well. So the last thing I would say to you is this. What is my role as a city manager as it relates to the enforcement of the Florida Building Code? And this is what I would tell you. The first and foremost, your job is to make sure that you have a good understanding of your ability inside your agency to provide that service. If you'll remember, we talked about multiple different options for how you can provide it. You can be a full service, you can be a hybrid, you can contract. Your job as the manager is to have a good understanding, a good grasp on your department's ability to provide that service. Because first and foremost, our responsibility is to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. And if we're going to do that as managers, we have to understand what resources we have available and whether those resources can actually do the project that we're asking them to do. So that's the first thing I would say to you. The second thing I would say is when you decide that you're going to provide that service, whether you're going to contract or whether you're going to hire within, be an active participant in the hiring, or at least understanding who's being hired for those leadership positions within that agency. Regulation is a big part of what the building department does. Regulation is what the building code is all about. Our job is to be a resource to connect the people in our community to the things that they need so that they can accomplish the things that they need to accomplish and do it in a safe manner. And so the people who run your building department, the people who issue your building permits, it's important that you as a manager know that they have your same vision for what the community is going to look like, and that when it comes to things like customer service, that they understand that customer service is just as important as the regulation side, that they need to be astute in both sides of that. So you need to hire well. Whether you're hiring employees or hiring contractors, you need to make sure that those people are going to carry forward your vision inside the community, because they are the contacts with the people who are actually trying to do the business. And the last thing that I would say to you is this. Once you've done a good job of determining whether you have the right resources or not, and then you've done a good job of hiring both the professionals and the contractors, get out of the way. When you hire a licensed professional, allow that professional to do their job. They get there because they go through training, there's testing that's required. Our job is to get the right people in the right place and then to empower them to do their job well. I hope this has been beneficial to you, and I hope you have a great day.